welcome to For the Love of Nature, a podcast where we tell you everything you need to know about nature and probably more than you wanted to know. I'm Laura.
And I'm Katy, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking about tidal pools and how they may be small, but they contain amazing ecosystems.
Ooh.
Tidal pools, I'm glad to at least be talking about this one because it is hot as the surface of the sun in Texas.
Yeah. It's not as the sun, but it's definitely like Venus here.
It is insane. Like, it's unhumanly. Like, nobody should have to be...
Unhumanly.
Nobody should have to exist in consistent, 110 degree weather for, months.
I'm not an extremophile.
Gosh, it's so freaking hot, and... yeah, it's just unfair. Texas is hot. We get it. But we normally hit in the hundreds, end of July, August, and then done. Last year, we thought it was hot, but it just stayed in the 90s until October. But now we've been in the 105 plus since the end of May. It's ridiculous.
You just look outside and everything's dead.
I mean, pretty much. And, water main breaks like crazy because everybody's using so much water because people still insist on having green lawns.
That's insanity.
Right? So, good.
It's going to dry up.
Well, have you seen everything going on with the Colorado?
No.
So we did the Colorado River, I talked about the Colorado River back in September of season, 3?
Last year. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, man, it's happening. It is happening. They are prepping. We're prepping for a possible drought here. Maybe October if we don't get any more rain. But Colorado they're prepping right now. It's getting bad. And everything downriver from them, too, the Colorado is just drying up. Lake Mead has, nothing in it.
Yeah, I think I have seen a picture of that from aerial, an aerial view.
Yeah. It's getting bad. It is hot everywhere this summer, but dang. Everything's just drying up.
People are still using that much water when you guys have your aquifers that are running out.
Oh, pretty much gone.
Yeah, there's just no more water.
Yeah.
But Lord forbid, I'm gonna have my green lawn.
Yeah, a lush green lawn.
There should be a law against such a thing in a place that's under drought conditions.
So there are. So once we hit a certain level of drought, once the lake levels get low enough, and I'm bleeding. Once lake levels get low enough, then we go into drought stages. So technically, I believe we're in stage 1 drought right now. However, because Texas is a drought-prone state, we're pretty much always in stage 1 drought. Right. So you water twice a week, or no more than twice a week. Can't water between the hours of 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then everybody, you have certain days that you can water. So that's pretty standard. Now, whenever we go, possibly this fall, up to the next stage, that's when crap's getting real. Because then we down, really start to, hone in on people watering and stuff like that. So, and every place in Texas has a drought plan, their conservation group for the water utility. You have a drought plan, and it says, whenever you hit X stage, the next one. But it tells you, as you're going through the different stages, what you need to be doing when and everything. And so then it's up to us to make sure people actually know about that sort of stuff.
Who enforces the lawn watering?
So we actually have our own enforcement team at the utility that I'm at. And then because we have remote read readers, we can see who's using water what. And so everybody freaks out that it's Big Brother-ish. But at the same time, it's just so many people don't understand, Texas doesn't have a lot of water. Same thing with California. You don't have water to spare, especially right now. And so when people are just watering because they're I want to pay for that lush green lawn. I'm just going to water whenever the heck I want. Okay.
It's not a matter of money. It's a matter of actually having water.
Yeah, of having water. And, you can go do that, but then everybody else in your area does it too. it's just taking up water. And so it's just unfortunate that people have that mindset, and they don't see, nor do they care to have that foresight to be like, oh, this is actually gonna, like, if everybody did this is really gonna mess us up in the long run. And so that's kind of where we're going. And unfortunately, everybody around in the Colorado River Basin, it's gonna be tough for them, and the whole U.S. is gonna feel it too, because there's so much agriculture that goes on down there over the winter months. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens in the near future. So it's not all bad. I mean, the good news is, again, it's like we talked about, what was that, last couple episodes ago, about different things that we can do to sustainable.
Yes. Yeah.
And what we can do, calling companies and things like that. So, now's the time to do it. If people don't see, climate change, it's not political, and I wish people would stop viewing it as political. But if people don't see, like, hey, we're really messing up our system now, I don't know what it's going to take. We shall see.
So yeah, like Katie said, we're going to talk about tide pools and how they're tiny little worlds unto themselves. I actually have only ever seen tide pools once when I went to Maine. It's the only coast I've ever seen with rock, because I've never been to the West Coast.
South Africa and Australia.
Cool. Yeah, no, in Costa Rica they didn't have, it was sand, so no rocks.
Yeah. Alrighty, well, we're going to first talk about, because, where are tide pools? Well, they're located in the intertidal zones. So we're going to keep saying that, but you guys all know what these intertidal zones are. It's the area between, like, the highest tide on the coast, the highest tide marks, and then the lowest tide marks. So when it's low tide and you can, like, walk out on the rocks, and then it's high tide, wherever the highest point is, it's all in that area. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about in this episode, is that habitat between the lowest point and the highest point. And that land in there, it could be rocky, and it can sometimes be sandy or covered in, like, a mud flat. It all depends on the ecosystem that you're in. Because I know, what was it, South Africa, I think it was. It was, like, rock and sand and all kinds of, like, yeah, like a mix of it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, like tides in general, I guess if our young listeners or anyone who hasn't been to the ocean, the tide is just the ocean rising and falling. It goes through that twice per day. It's like an alternate rise, fall, depending on where you are. Apparently the Gulf of Mexico, they only have one tide per day. I did not know that.
Yeah, I guess so.
Weird.
I didn't know that either. And I guess I never thought of it.
Yeah.
Like, I've been to the Gulf, I've just never...
I just thought it was a given. But yeah, so like Katie said, the intertidal zone, and this place, it's actually a lot like our extremophile episode, so it's not like crazy extreme, but it's definitely a harsh place to live.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing with this fluctuation in temperature, salinity, oxygen, wave force, predators, and tons of competition. Like, it's a pretty extreme place. But it is great to live here because there are lots of nutrients, plenty to eat, and quite a few places to hide and cling to. And so Katie and I kind of broke this up because there are 4 main zones in the intertidal area. There is the splash zone, the high tide zone, middle tide zone, and the low tide zone. These are based on location and how long they're exposed to the air, with splash being the highest and low being the lowest. Each has different things that live there, and within those there are layers of living things, and usually there are certain index species, which are ones that occur abundantly in specific zones and therefore indicates where you are. So we're going to kind of be talking about what lives in our zones. You want to start with the tippy top?
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about the splash zone, or the supra littoral zone, the fringe zone, or the white zone. Apparently has a bajillion different names. Yeah.
I heard the super littoral I've heard of, but the white zone,
I guess.
Maybe like the salt?
I don't know. I guess, yeah, maybe. Yeah, probably.
Like the dry salt.
So the splash zone is the bit of shore above the highest tide. So we talked about the intertidal zone, low tide to high tide. This is kind of the splash zone. Think SeaWorld. Like, the front, you know, not quite the front row, but the one where you get all the mist all the time.
You get wet at some point.
Yes. So it's above the highest tide and below of the start of the actual terrestrial vegetation, aka it's the upper part of the beach that occasionally gets splashed, but never covered by the ocean, technically.
Gotcha.
So the width of this zone changes with the slope of the shore, of course. Variations in light and shade, exposure to waves and spray, tidal range, and the frequency of cool days and damp fog. So depending...
Damp fog.
Heavy fog. So it all depends, like, because you could have a very small splash zone, or you could have a big splash zone. It all depends on...
Yeah, I'm assuming
all kinds of terrain
like
factors.
Those rocky cliffs probably have a giant splash zone because of the force smashing the rocks. But I bet,
and it just goes
like
straight up.
A real long slope is probably like nothing.
Nothing. Yeah, nothing at all. A tide pool. And Laura, are you going to talk about tide pools a little bit more?
Like what is a tide pool?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll go ahead and I'll skip that for you. So because there are tide pools in all of these areas, not as much in the splash zone, but there are still some tide pools in this splash zone. So within those pools,
you go ahead, explain, because I'm
okay.
gonna be like, why am I waiting?
Why? What is a pool? So a tide pool is basically it's left by the receding tide in a rock depression or basin. Often provides a habitat for animals common to the area. So it's basically crevice, a bowl, something where water sits, and things
like a
chill
fancy
there.
Puddle.
A fancy puddle. It is a fancy puddle. It is a fancy puddle. So some of these smaller isolated tide pools, they do provide, very specialized habitats because of the increased salinity and temperature due to solar heating and evaporation. So in this splash zone, that's kind of the downfall of the splash zone, is there is like really never a time where you get like cooled off. It's always just
the desert.
Yeah, it's just hot, like just really, really hot. Typically, because of the high salt content from the splash, because remember, it's not like doused, so it doesn't get ever rinsed off. It's just like the mist of salt. It has, like we said, extreme temperatures and wind. I didn't really think about that, like how bad the wind gets in these splash zones, because it's like harsh wind. Because it's windy near the beach, but this part is always hit with wind.
Dry, salty, and hot. It sounds like the worst place ever.
Right? And I never really thought about how bad that can be. There's very little rainwater available here. And because of these problems, oftentimes the only thing that hangs out here are lichen. So if you've listened to any of our other episodes, I love me some good lichen.
Lichen.
Some lichen. And since lichen don't need a whole lot else to grow but on a good rock, the splash zone is a great area for them. We've covered lichen in other episodes, but just to give you a refresher, lichen is made up of two organisms, a fungus and an algae. And that's your refresher. That's a lichen.
That's a lichen.
That's it. But they do serve a good purpose. They break down the rock, lichens do, and so that can help.
It's such a... Okay, go with me here. Picture this, like you've zoomed into the splash zone, and all you see is this lichen, but it's anthropomorphized. So it's like, just like a little dude, all crispy and covered in salt, chapped lips.
Yeah, right.
But it's so perfect because lichen is crispy and crunchy like that.
They are. Help me.
Or that's totally, they're just fine with it, just like, yay. Just like...
I'm liking my spot here. Dying.
All right.
If anybody else just laughed at that, please reach out to us, because you are our people. Oh, goodness. But besides... Yeah, right? We're going insane! But besides lichen, there are not a whole lot of flowering plants that live in the splash zone because of how salty it is. And like just all the other adaptations that they would have to live there, like the harsh wind and lack of soil, for one. There are a few that do live in splash zones. Some popular ones are sea plantains and different types of thrifts. I don't know.
What is a thrift?
It's a plant, a flowering plant.
Okay. I didn't
It's
know
like,
it was a plant
yeah,
or
like
animal.
sea thrift. It's like the pink flowers. If you Google it, you'll know pretty quick. You'll be like, oh, okay. Very few marine mammals live in the splash zone full time. Mammals as far as like you have sea lions and elephant seals, like they'll hang out here because they're like, mist, the sun. But they don't live there full time. But there are some that do actually like this area, like the rough periwinkle and the small periwinkle.
The little snails.
Yep. And the reason why that they like to live here is because they like to graze on lichen. So, makes sense.
Totally makes sense, yeah.
Other animals that live here include sometimes barnacles, lice, limpets, sometimes whelks. And this area, like I said before, is also typically where you're going to see sea lions and elephant seals out sunbathing.
Cool.
You're also going to often see seabirds perching here. And depending on the habitat of the splash zone, you might see some sea turtles and, as they're coming up, kind of chilling there, getting some sun too.
Yeah, laying eggs and stuff.
Yep. So because of these there are some larger animals there, but in particular because of the seabirds, predation is very common. Because you figure there's nothing there to hide. Yeah, you're just completely exposed. So, besides the harsh environment, if you're chilling there, you have to be ready to be swooped down and, like, taken up by a damn bird at any minute's notice.
Death could come at any moment.
By those stupid gulls that, we've talked about. A french fry out of one side of its beak and a little periwinkle on the other.
This periwinkle will go nicely with my french fry.
Yeah, right? Jeez. But anyway, yeah, so splash zone, very harsh environment. It's a splash zone. It's never fully cooled down. You're just sitting there baking, and lichen really likes it, but that's about it.
Okay, well, let's go down the beach a little to the high tide or upper mid-littoral zone. So this is where actually the high tide does reach. So it's wet. It's just wet for a short period of time. Only during high tide, only the twice a day. So the conditions here are that it's pretty darn salty because lots of evaporation happens here. It can get really hot from the sun. Basically, high stress environment. And because of that, just like the splash zone, not a ton lives here, but a little bit more than the splash zone because it does get wet a little more often. So the index species are the animals that are almost only found within this belt are limpets, although that you can see they creep up into the splash zone sometimes.
They're probably just confused.
I just love the word limpet too.
Limpet.
It's such a funny word.
Yeah.
They're grazers, so they're probably, they're going around looking for algae and stuff. They're pretty flat. They basically look like a fingernail. So if you're like, what's a limpet? It looks like a fingernail.
That's such a gross way to describe it, though. I know. It's just gross, though.
Yeah. There's a species called a fingernail limpet.
Yeah.
They form... What's cool, though, is that they form their shells to the rock so that they can get a tight seal to prevent desiccation. And so they, make this little depression in the rock, essentially. They fit themselves perfectly to it. And then, when it's wet, they go around, they graze, and then they come back to that same spot called their home scar.
Yeah.
And go back down to prevent desiccation or drying out. Also, plenty of other... I think it's latorine snails, which are whirly ones, coiled shells. So periwinkles are also in this area.
Yep.
Which, cool thing about periwinkle snails is they can cluster together and they secrete mucus that glues them to the rock.
So gross. It's so cool though. Just imagine if our snot was glue, how horrible that would be. Like the things you would get, like the things that little kids would get stuck to them. Just like, they're just walking around with like Hot Wheels cars attached to their face and like just everything would be stuck. Oh, so gross.
Yeah, so like limpets are moving around quite a bit. Periwinkles not so much, and then barnacles not at all. Because barnacles look like rocks with mouths. And they will cut the living daylights out of your feet, which I know.
Ugh, yeah.
They are permanently attached. They're filter feeders, and they close their little shells tight to prevent desiccation. And if you haven't, please go back to one of our animal sex episodes.
Yes, right?
Because the barnacle makes an appearance. They've got some crazy reproduction stuff.
They make an appearance. Yeah, they do.
Some other species that you might find here are some types of sea anemone. Wow, how typical that I can't say anemone. I'm like, Nemo.
Yeah. Anemone.
So yes, sea anemones, crabs, starfish, and some mussels. Many of these species have shells to keep them from drying out, or they cluster together to reduce exposure, or they're mobile so they can just leave this place. There are a few species, but lots of individuals. So not much biodiversity, but lots of them. So like if you're going to see limpets, there's going to be a ton of limpets. If you're going to see barnacles, there's lots of barnacles. But there aren't very many different species. That's high tide. Cool.
And that's high tide. Alrighty. The middle tide zone. So as the name would imply, this area is submerged and flooded for approximately equal periods of time per cycle. Makes sense.
This seems like a nice place to live.
It would, except for everything that lives everywhere else is pretty much also living here. So like,
You like the water? You like the land? Perfect.
Yeah, great spot. So, anyway, so because the temperatures here are less extreme than up in the splash zone, and, you know, there's shorter direct exposure to the sun, therefore salt concentrations are only marginally higher than this ocean levels because it's not, again, not the splash zone where it's just like salt everywhere. This at least gets, even though it's salt water, you get kind of rinsed off, every so often. Yeah. The wave action generally is more extreme here than in the high tide and spray zone. The middle tide zone, it also has a much higher population of marine vegetation, specifically seaweeds. So this is the area, like, as if you see, like, sea lions chilling in seaweed, or, like, seals, like, pictures of seals, like, just hunkering down in seaweed, that's the middle zone. Because, again, they're partially exposed, partially underwater. Organisms here are often larger in size than those found at the high tide and splash zones. Organisms in this area include also anemones, more barnacles, chitons, chitons, crabs, green algae, other isopods, limpets, mussels, sea lettuce, sea palms, sea stars, snails,
sponges. You added an R in there, and there's no R in that word.
Wait, in where?
Chiton. It's like CHITON.
What did I say?
You put an R in there.
Put an R where?
Chitron.
Oh, maybe I did. Anyway, the listeners know by now I have trouble reading.
It's cool looking. You guys should look it up. They're pretty. They look like a living shield. Yeah.
They're also known as gumboots, or sea cradles, or coat of mail snails.
Okay, coat of mail snail actually makes sense. But a gumshoe? What the heck? Why
Gumboot. I know gumboots in South Africa. They're they're rubber rain boots, gumboots.
Yeah. They don't look like a boot.
I don't think so either. But they're pretty cool.
Yeah, they're kind of mollusk.
Yeah. Interesting.
Sorry, I don't know anything about them, so I
don't know a ton. So again, rock pools, like little tide pools, can also provide a habitat for small fish, because they'll like wash up, get kind of stuck here for a bit, and then whoop, when the tide comes out, like goes back up again, fish just go right back out into the water. Shrimp can live here, different types of krill, sea urchins, and a variety of zooplankton. So apart from being more populated, life in the middle zone is more diversified than the high tides and splash zones. But like we said, it's kind of like a little bit of everything and anything that live here, just because it's the middle zone. So whatever you're going to see in the high tide, whatever you're going to see in the low tide, chilling in the middle zone too.
Just right.
Right?
The Goldilocks zone?
Yeah, I didn't see that anywhere. Why is it not called the Goldilocks zone?
That we're coining it right now, people.
Boom. Katy and Laura, we have said it here first. Goldilocks zone.
Goldilocks zone of the beach.
Yeah.
You only have to worry about the tide half the time. You can be wet, you could be dry, you could be hot, you could be chilly. Perfect.
Perfect. Everything.
All right. Well, then all the way down at the bottom is, of course, the low tide and low tide pools. This is also known as the lower littoral zone. This is just above, like, just straight up ocean. So it's mostly underwater, except on the lowest of low tides. So, like, once the low tide is completely out, like, and there are certain times, so as the year goes by, tides fluctuate. Some are really, really high and some are really, really low. And so sometimes this area is exposed to the air. The conditions here, like I said, mostly underwater. There are, of course, way less fluctuations with temperature and salinity here, because it's basically just the ocean with just a little bit of drying out. But because of that, the biggest issues here are predation and competition. So just like predation was really high in the splash zone because you were exposed, down here, you're basically exposed to all the ocean creatures that want to eat you.
Yeah. Because it's like a buffet.
Yes, this is the seafood buffet zone. Also coining that one.
Yeah.
So the buffet zone, the buffet zone, like, yeah. We'll have to think of something for the high zone. So predation and competition, because everybody wants to live here, because there's a lot of good reasons. This is where most of the nutrients are because of the constant fluctuations in the water. Index species here are a lot of them. Sea stars in particular. So picture the typical star shape with five limbs. Many sea stars are keystone predators of urchins, barnacles, and mussels. And guys, we should really do like an episode on like starfish. Well,
we should
with our living taxon ones.
Yeah,
like our taxonomy ones, we'll have to.
But them just alone, they're
intense.
Yeah, no, they are. They're insane.
You're like, oh, it's just a cute little star that just goes along on its 2 feet. But if you're like zoomed in and you're at the level of a starfish, oh my gosh, you do not want to be on the wrong end of a starfish if you're anything else, because they never get tired because of all their tube feet. They just take rests with different tube feet. Like, so what they do is they're eating like these mollusks. They cover it up. You're a mollusk. There's nothing you can do about this.
Yeah, right? There. You just have to take it.
Meanwhile, something is prying you open with 1,000,000 feet. And some feet are taking breaks, and some of them are going to keep going. It's relentless. They never get tired. Then once they've opened it up a crack, they puke their stomach in there, and their stomach digests you from the outside. It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. I also wish you guys could see Laura's hair as she's saying that.
I look like the guy from Alien.
It's all like you want to talk about a messy butt. It's just like sticking up, and she's like, it's intense. It's just like,
dude, I look just like the Aliens guy. But it's about sea stars. And of course, sea stars are known for their incredible regenerative powers. They can regrow from just an arm. Like, they don't even need the rest of it. Just an arm. And then,
can you imagine if people were like that? Like, I mean, granted, we don't just have like human arms laying around everywhere, well, but like, but could you imagine
if you get blown up? That'd be convenient.
Like, like a whole new person. So like, you lose your arm, all right, and then like the rest of a human just starts growing from it.
Well, and
is that a gross, twin? Though? Like.
No, right. So there's some ethical things here to think about, or some like, because like, when is it you Is it still you?
Yeah.
Are you
Is it
now
still
in two
you?
bodies, or are
Yeah.
you a different thing? It's different.
Man, we
But
just got
also-
deep.
Yeah, but also the new parts that regrow. You know how, like, if you've ever seen like a lizard that lost its tail, it's tiny. Or if you see a starfish that's regrowing, it's tiny. It starts over. It's like it literally. Imagine a person. Yeah, like
with a really huge arm.
giant arm. It's literally just an arm.
You're just like
with,
2 inches
a
big.
penis attached.
Oh. That's so gross.
Because all I'm picturing is the tiny little alien from Men in Black.
Right?
Like that little
Yes.
tiny alien guy, but with a beefy, like with the most beefy arm. Like a normal human arm.
Oh, like a big man arm of just like.
And yeah, and it like, because it's right, a big man arm with like an anchor tattoo.
Yeah.
And so when this tiny little fetus thing like opens its mouth, it's like, hello.
Yeah.
Just really unexpected.
Oh,
Walking around, it just flips itself up on its hand and is like walking around.
That'd be so terrifying.
It'd be one of the scariest things ever. But I mean, I guess if that was a normal thing, it would be normal.
I don't know. It would still be
Can you
terrifying.
imagine having to hold the door for something like that? Hold the door as you let in this just hand. You know, the guy just salutes you on top. Think of all the amenities that like would need to be changed to be able to help.
A hand.
It's like a foot.
Oh, yeah. Like a leg. Like just hopping.
Or I guess if it's a head, you're just out of luck.
Yeah,
Because,
right? It's just a
Like
teeny
a
tiny
little body wouldn't be able to do anything with a giant head.
head. Oh, we're so weird. The conversation.
Yeah, this is an extra weird episode. People probably think that we do. Like,
We don't do
recreational
drugs.
substances.
Yeah,
We
that's
don't.
that's the crazy part. We don't do drugs.
It's just raw Katy and Laura.
Oh my gosh.
Sunday night raw.
I'm done.
So besides sea stars, guess what? More anemones. Which anyone who's like, what the heck is an anemone? It's sort of like a flower. It's a stalk with tons of little tentacles. The tentacles they've actually got two kinds of tentacles, which I didn't know. Some are for feeding and some are for fighting.
Didn't know.
Like they got their feeding arms and their fighting arms.
Fighting arms. That would be convenient. My left arm. It's like my left arm, my fighting arm, my right arm, my feeding arm.
It's like very dainty and long fingered. The other one's all big and hairy. Okay, this should be a new episode idea where we like have to think of like if humans were
like animals.
were,
Oh
something,
man,
something about nature, and then we just
It's
have to,
coming,
trash talk
folks.
the other person.
it's coming.
Most filter feed, although some can photosynthesize because they team up with algae.
Oh, makes sense. Yeah.
Also, brown algae lives here. Seagrasses, bryozoans, tunicates, tube worms, and coral. And then just other species. Those were just index species. Other species. Crabs, snails, limpets, barnacles, mussels, sponges, shrimp, chitons, sea urchins, abalone, sea slugs, sea cucumbers, fish, octopi, brittle stars, sea hares, and green algae.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah, so this is obviously crazy biodiversity here. But not many individuals. Because of the competition and the predation.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of variety, but not a lot of individuals. And again, we've talked about octopi before, but I could talk about sea slugs for a whole episode too, because they're so cool looking.
They are pretty neat.
Talk about beautiful. And
Yeah.
sea hares, you need to Google what a sea hare looks like. It's so cute. It's like a slug with ears, like a bunny.
Oh, I've seen them. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So the things that live in this zone, they have to have something to help them, like, cling on. So basically everything I named can cling because the pounding of the waves here is intense.
Yeah.
If you don't have things to cling with, you're small enough that you can hide under, like, you can take shelter underneath of something. these animals live here because they're more sensitive to changes. So these animals, they live in this particular place because they can't deal with the extreme salt or the extreme heat or anything like that. So this is more of like the delicate little tide pools that are full of life, but as soon as something is off, everything dies. So it's this like very sensitive little world. So yes, which I think will lead us into the last thing we wanted to talk about, which is human impact.
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, this is a really cool place to go, really cool place to explore. But as we know, as we were talking about earlier, climate change and how hot everything is getting, our coastlines are taking a huge hit. I mean, there was that video that was going around not long ago on the east coast of the U.S. where that house just like fell in because of the tides. Did you see that one where it just like...
I'm not surprised at all. I mean, here in Maryland, we're very low. I mean, we're obviously very close to sea level because of the Chesapeake Bay, and it's definitely rising. Like, there are parts of D.C. that are more flooded than ever.
Yeah, which is crazy. So, and as...
for sure are changing.
Oh, definitely. And these are, too, the intertidal zones are, so that has a huge impact. But then human populations in general, because... everybody wants to live, near the beach or tourism.
Hang out at the beach, yeah.
Yep, so there's just constant, people down there. So the human impact on the intertidal zones, generally a direct result of trampling or collecting things.
I believe that. Because everything is so beautiful. And so
it is really cool. It is really cool.
Forever.
Yeah. So, as Laura said, you want to keep it forever. Rule number 1, don't collect things whenever you're there. Kind of carefully. Tip 2 is step safely. So step 1 is just don't collect crap.
Yeah, unless I'm sure if it's dead and you're in a place where you're allowed to collect.
Where you're allowed to, yeah.
The shoreline is protected.
Protected, yeah. So definitely be aware of where you are. Because even sometimes in national parks, I believe it is, even taking shells. Yeah, you can't touch can't take stuff. So check it out, because they are really cool places to explore, and you want people outside exploring. It's just 1, don't collect things. 2, step safely. Like we said, there's all kinds of things that live in these areas, and so just be
usually small,
and usually very tiny.
Tidal zone.
Yeah, and they're just trying to survive, and you take out one thing in the area, and then the whole ecosystem there collapses. So no bueno. Thirdly, don't trash it. Unfortunately, just like any other park, people just leave their trash out there because they'll be hanging out, exploring, bloop, throw something, drinking a can or whatever, have trash, throw it, chuck it, done. But there are some things that you can do to help, like volunteering. There's all kinds of, at most beaches, they have, cleanups.
Yeah. For sure. There's an international one, one day a year. I know it's a shoreline cleanup around the whole world.
Yeah, which is really neat. I mean, and the stuff you get from it's so neat.
Because it's not even just stuff from people leaving it there hanging out. This standard
wash up
is just right. It's the wash up too.
Yeah, just constant washing up. And so that's that's the 4th one, is just go ahead and volunteer for stuff like that if you're nearby. And then also, we talked about it on the other episode about, yes, your individual actions, are beneficial and everything, but, bugging companies to be more sustainable and everything too makes an impact. And these are typically the areas that get hit the most because they're right on the coastline. So a few quick tips. So don't collect things, just go, don't touch, kind of the leave no trace. Step safely.
Take pictures. Yeah.
Yep. Step safely. Like I said, don't trash it. Leave no trace. Principles. Volunteer, and then just be a little bit more sustainable.
Sounds good. I can't wait. I really want to go exploring tide pools on the West Coast. I've heard they're incredible. I have an ex-coworker who just moved out to Oregon and is going to take tide pool classes, to how to ID stuff. I was like, that sounds so cool.
That is really neat.
I'm pretty jealous because there's really not tide pools. There's mud flats and stuff here around the Chesapeake Bay. And so, of course, there's little crabs and everybody. But you don't have octopi and sea slugs and stuff hanging out in these.
Yeah. I really got to make it to the West Coast. I really do. I haven't been out there, West Coast of the U.S. If anybody lives out there and would love to surf couch for Laura and I,
yeah,
we would love to come out there. That would be really cool.
Oregon, Washington.
Yeah. Cool places to be. All right, everybody. That was a fun little quick episode. It wasn't too long, but really neat. I mean, really cool ecosystem, again, that I wish I could explore way more often.
Yeah, and I love the whole concept of the small worlds. Like you talked about before with the bromeliads and trees, how it's like a tiny ecosystem in just one plant. It's like a whole world. A tide pool is a whole world.
Just in that tide pool. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a fancy puddle.
And a fancy puddle.
And a fancy puddle.
In the Goldilocks zone of the beach.
Or the buffet. Yeah.
Or the buffet. Yeah. What's the high one? So the splash zone already has some good names. Although I think it should really be called the crispy zone.
The crispy zone. Okay, so you have the crispy zone, high tide.
And then the high one is like, just sounds unpleasant.
Just unpleasant zone. So you have the crispy zone, the unpleasant zone, the unpleasant zone, the Goldilocks, and the buffet zone. Buffet. You heard it here, folks. Katy and Laura just renaming science.
All the marine biologists out there are like,
these two idiots naming things. The unpleasant zone. All right, everybody. Well, until next time, if anybody lives near like a tidal zone, or if you guys have pictures, send them to us.
Take some pics. That's what I was going to say. Take some pics.
Or send us pictures if you have some, and then we'll go ahead and we'll post them and give you credit and everything for it.
Definitely. So. Yeah, well, people up in Maine, I don't know if they're anywhere near the coast, but if they are, we want pictures.
For sure. All right, everybody. Until next week, go ahead and go check out our Patreon or follow us on Twitter and chat with us on there. And because we will definitely send us any kind of bizarre pictures you have of wildlife or nature. Because
of nature.
Of nature. Yeah, please, dear God, of nature. Because we like to see it. So, of nature. So.
Talk to you next week.
Bye.